Hi, welcome to my training. I am Teri, and I'm the founder of Women's Ministry Resources.com. I'm also a blogger in other spheres of the web, as well as a professional trainer. But I am excited to create content for brand new ministry leaders that are focusing on building women for God's kingdom. You're doing important work, and I feel like there are just not enough resources out there for you. So I'm going to leverage my over 30 years of experience as in women's ministry, but also in training, and hopefully we'll be able to give you a good experience. Now, I'm not perfect. And I don't know everything, but what I'm going to do in this class is share with you what I know. And I want you to take what works and amend where you need to amend, but also discard what doesn't work for you and what doesn't fit. Okay? All righty. As I've mentioned, the name of my website is womensministryresources.com. And there, I'm going to focus on completely nothing but women's ministry resources. So I want you to go there, subscribe, and be a part of that community that's going to be emerging, because there we can share and connect with one another and actually learn from one another. So as I am recording this training, I am working on creating a Facebook page for women just like you who complete the training and want to have a safe place to talk about women's ministry and even your ideas without any fear or trepidation of judgment or anybody stealing your ideas. We don't care about that. This is the kingdom, but definitely just a place for you to share. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, I'm going to say, woohoo, you are a new women's ministry leader, and I am so excited for you. So, congratulations. Whether you volunteered for this role or you were voluntold, which means you kind of got volunteered but told to do it, either by God or by someone in leadership at your church or in the community. Either way, I want you to celebrate, and I want you to totally embrace this role, because you're going to find it's going to enrich you and your life in ways that you could not have imagined. And not only that, you're going to bless so many women. So, congratulations on saying yes and accepting this wonderful call that God has called you into for this season or maybe forever. Now, it's always important to be obedient to God. And being a ministry leader in the women's sphere is no different. So, God is going to lead you to do things that are going to probably be new to you, just like this, or maybe hard for you. And I want you to just always lean into obedience. Okay? Don't worry about what people may think or how things may turn out so much all the time, because I'll tell you, in my experience, I've created some great women's ministry efforts. I've been featured in my local newspaper and even on CNN.com for women's ministry efforts. But honey, more than that, I have done a lot of bombs. I've done some programs and projects that just didn't work. But the funny thing about it is I was obedient, and God usually made it to where someone got blessed. And if nothing else, I learned. I learned from what I was doing. So lean into obedience, even though it's scary and at times it just may feel really like you're wobbly. Lean into it. Because here's the thing, God is going to equip you. He's going to train you. He's going to give you everything and everyone you need to be successful. Okay? So don't look at numbers. It doesn't matter how many women come to your event, it doesn't matter how many don't come. I want you to know that God is going to equip you to do what He wants you to do. Okay? That's your only success measure, being obedient and allowing God to equip you. Now, if you're shaking in your boots and everything I'm saying, you're like, okay, sounds good, Teri, but I don't know. Here's the thing, you're in good company, honey. The people who have done the greatest things for the kingdom or even in the world are people who didn't necessarily apply for those positions. They kind of landed in those positions, or they just were obedient. In the Bible, I think of Moses. Remember, Moses didn't want to do anything that God asked him to do. He was like, I can't speak, Lord. I think he had a stutter, right? So he didn't speak well, but look what God did with him. Jeremiah, he thought he was too young. Okay? Gideon had family issues. The point is nobody usually runs into the awesomeness of ministry. Very often people run away from it. But God equips and he's going to take care of you. So I want you to just focus on that. Take a deep breath, literally. I'm serious. I want you to take a deep breath right now. And I want you to release the stress of this. God's got you. He's going to teach you, carry you, and guide you. You're going to be okay. All right. Now, I want you to do the very first thing, which is the very first thing. You got to pray. I want you to spend some time. Honestly, give yourself a few weeks, a couple of weeks if you can, to really pray and exhale and sit before God and see what He's leading you to do. And the reason I say this is because so often we're so busy and our lives are so cluttered and we don't tap into the creative power that God has given us because we just can't hear Him because we're just so rushed. So I want you to slow your pace, slow your roll, okay? And just go into a little bit of a season of prayer before you start appointing people, before you start creating plans. Pray. And then I want you to wait a minute so you can hear God and have this laser focused view of what He wants you to do. Okay. And this is something, it sounds so cliche, but it's something that I have failed to do before because I'm a doer and you probably are too because you're in this role. And I've neglected this. And one thing I would say if I had to go back and say what would I change? It would be praying and sitting before God. Now the beautiful thing is God will catch me. One of my favorite scriptures is if my foot shall slip, right? He's going to catch me. He's going to get me. He's going to keep me. So, and I'm going to have to find that scripture. I think it's Psalm 16, but I can't remember right now. I'm improvising. I'm in that area. But I want you to know that, and if you need to know what it is, hit me up on Instagram, Women's Ministry Resources, or somewhere, and I'll post it. Okay, so you'll know. But I want you to know He'll catch you and find you, so you're not going to be able to mess it up. But I do want you to spend that time praying and seeking God. Okay. Then I want you to record the vision He gives you. This is so, so, so important. I want you to write it down. You know that scripture, make the vision plain and write it down. I want you to write down and capture what God gives you. One of the biggest lessons that I seem to not learn is to capture what God gives me in the moment. Have you ever been driving and He gives you this great idea and you're like, I won't forget it. And then what do? You forget it, right? So I want you to capture the vision He gives you as He gives it to you in the moment. You may have to keep a notepad by your bed, okay? Or you may have to keep one while you're driving. And so you can hit a light. You can write that down at a red light. I don't know. But I want you to capture it. It's important that you capture it. Okay, because you'll lose it. And I want you to be accurate in what you do for the Lord. And I want you to not have to go back and forth. Trust me, I'm speaking from experience. I've done that and it's less effective and it's less efficient. So capture what God tells you. And then we're going to talk about that a little later, how you're going to build upon it. Okay. So you're going to pray for His guidance, you're recording your vision. And then I want you as a leader and as a person to list your top 5 strengths that you're going to be able to leverage in ministry. But I don't want you to think about ministry so much. I want you to think about your personals, who you are. List your top 5 strengths. For me, I'm a communicator. I talk good. Okay, I'm a communicator. I write, I talk, I speak. I can communicate my thoughts and my feelings really well. I'm also a outgoing person. I love to be around people, even though at my core I'm an introvert. I'm also very organized and structured in a lot of ways, and so I can go on and on. But I want you to think about your top gifts, and I'm gonna give you some examples in a minute. Okay, but I want you to write them down. And I want you to do this now. Okay. Before this slide ends, pause this if you have to. But I want you to write down your top 5 strengths. Then, of course, you can see on the screen what I want you to do next. I want you to honestly write down your top 5 weaknesses. Okay. Now, this is going to be a joke, but it's really honestly true. If nothing comes to you, I want you to ask a family member or your husband. I know it sounds funny, but preface it and say, you know what? I'm doing a self-assessment of myself. And I want you to know it's safe to tell me what you think, but I want you to tell me what are my top 5 weaknesses and then record those. Okay, because you need to know your weaknesses so you can know how to manage them, and you need to know your strengths so you can know how to maximize them. Now, I'll tell you a little bit more about that weakness in a minute, but for now, here's some examples for you. Okay, I want you to have a few examples that you can use to kind of inspire your thoughts. You got organization. That's one of my strengths. You got communication. Another one of my strengths. You got humor. Oh my gosh, this is all about me. If you make people laugh, or if you're able to kind of relax people, if you're a good listener, you see the list. Those are examples of strengths that you can write down what yours are. Then you can think about your weaknesses. It could be delegating, which honestly is one of mine too. All right. It could be impatience, creativity. Maybe you're not that creative person that can take a toothpick, a piece of tape, and a straw and make something cool out of it. It's okay. It's okay. But I want you to write down what those are. And don't rush to do this. You can take your time, and kind of ponder it and think about it. And then I want you to definitely work on being a good delegator. I want you to work on being creative and, just expanding yourself, even if you're not, and definitely patience. You got to work on that one. But here's the thing, you're going to recruit a team. I don't want you to do this yourself. Now, people will say, "Hey, I can handle it. I can do it all myself," and this is a big job. This is a big venture. So I don't want you to try to do this all by yourself. I want you to think about how many people you might need, and you might know that more after this training. But I want you to think about it because it's a big mistake to think that you can do this by yourself. I used to work for a national nonprofit organization famous for selling cookies. I was a training manager there. And one thing I remember is people always try to do these volunteer roles by themselves. And you can't. You need a volunteer structure. Okay. I mean, I can't say that enough. And then I want you to recruit those people based on what your weaknesses were. So what you said your weaknesses were or are, I want you to recruit people who tend to be strong in those areas. So if you are an impatient person, surround yourself with people who are of the temperament of slow, contemplative, analytical, those kind of people. If you are not creative, honey, you know who to look for, those Pinterest people. The people who are creative and know how to do things. If you're not good at technology or writing, those are the people you're going to want to pray for God to send to your way. And you want to use them so that they can help you where you're weak. And then what you'll do is create a strong team. Oh, went too fast. So you'll create a strong team by getting people who balance you out, basically. Okay, so seek them out, and I bet you $1, you already know them. You already know these people. So you're going to recruit toward your weaknesses. Now, I got to warn you, there is a warning that comes with this. If I had a sound effect, I would put it here because there is a warning. You know what? You're going to have conflicts with people who are strong where you're weak because you don't understand them on a real or a real primal level, right? You're not going to understand what comes natural to them because it's foreign to you. So I want you to be prepared to not be in conflict with them. Okay, that's why it's a warning. So just know you're gonna say, I'm gonna recruit people who are good at all my weaknesses. And I'm not gonna get along with them. I'm not gonna understand everything. And there are gonna be times you're gonna have to do what a good leader does and just let them go and do their thing because you are not gonna totally get what they get because you don't got what they got. All right. So just be prepared for that. Be aware of it and be prepared. Now let's talk about the church as an organization because that's what it is and I was going to go through the modules here, but we're going to skip that because I've decided not to do that. I should have took that slide out. That's why this is free because I'm working on it. But I want you to think about the church as a organization because that's really what it is. It's not just a place of worship, but there's a business structure behind that. I didn't realize that to the degree that I thought I knew it until I married a senior pastor. And I learned then how significantly um, entrepreneurial and businessy a church is. A church usually has missions, visions, and values. A lot of it, of course, is dictated by, the Bible, which is why you see the Bible there in the image. But no, even beyond that, leaders are running their churches with specific bents and passions towards certain areas. Okay, there's a church I pass every day in Missouri that is, I can tell whoever is in charge there, they really, really care about the community, because every day I see, not every day, I'm exaggerating, but often I see a sign that says they're going to either have a food giveaway, a clothing giveaway, or job help or something. That's, I was like, that pastor, his brand or her brand, is definitely community building, right? And building families. So find out what yours is if you don't know it. It may not be automatically evident to you, but you can talk to your pastor or a church leadership and find out what it is. You can ask them, because hey, we know the Bible tells us as a church why we exist. That's typically a good key to ask a business. What is our mission? Why do we exist? We know why we exist, right? To bring glory to God and to expand the kingdom. But is there a specific mission, Pastor, that we have that you really want me to lean into? It could be education. My husband is big on Christian education. Big. He wants people to know how to rightly divide the word of truth, right? What is it, that your pastor is passionate about? Because you're going to want to align your women's ministry to some degree so that everything is cohesive and coherent. Okay. Here's some examples that I found from this church by it's Church Relevance website. Look at these. There are some mission statements that churches have. And, it's like one says making disciples, 2 words. How simple is that, right? You can go down Church of the Resurrection, which is actually not far from where I live. It says to know, love, and serve God. So take a peek at these. And your pastor probably has one that he can communicate already, even if it's not written anywhere and it's not brought up. Like my husband often he quizzes us, what's our mission? What's the church mission? And we know what it is. Okay. So ask your pastor so you can align with his mission. Do you know the word submission? The root of it, is sub, which means you kind of fall up under a mission. So you want to make sure that you are in God's mission for that church. Okay. Ask him, what are our values, Pastor? What is it that what are we about? What is it that what values are we trying to exemplify, in the body of Christ? For my husband is professional ministry. He wants it ministry to come off without a hitch, and of course we're not perfect, so it doesn't always happen, but he wants us to come off without a hitch. And so ask your pastor, what are our values for our church? And you never know, this might be a opportunity for your pastor to define some of these things if he hasn't already. All right. And very often, though, pastors know in their head, even if they haven't written it down, because it's linked, to whatever his call is, whatever God has gifted him to do or made him passionate about. That's what it's typically linked to. It could be, like I mentioned about the other church, it could be community, right? Where it's all about building up the community and the community around us, and definitely leading people to Christ. But it could be about that. It could be about building strong neighborhoods. I literally know churches who do that. I know a church pastor in Missouri who built a neighborhood. His church actually built um, some amazing new complexes for people to live in. There was also another church who they built senior living. So there's so many things that can happen around neighborhoods. Maybe your pastor is passionate about, I don't know, feeding people. That's a possibility, right? And then, of course, there's the education, as I mentioned with my husband. And then I want you to do an activity. If you were in a group with me, I would have you do this in your group to discuss the mission and the values of the church now that you know them. Okay. And I want you to do that because I want it to get really embedded into your mental psyche, what that is, so that when you plan activities, you'll be able to plan activities that are in alignment. with that so that we can have this cohesive, organized church structure. I also want you to think about how your ministry specifically will align with whatever your church is doing. So, if community is a big part, like that church I mentioned, a big part of your guys' mission, then you can have women's clothes closets or women's toiletries that go into community centers that need help, or not even women in distress. Because, and this is me bypassing and kind of sidetracking, but very often, women's ministries will do things for people in distress. But in this day and age, more people are in distress than in distress. Okay, and I mean that by, you have the working poor, you have women who are struggling to pay for groceries. You have so much. So think about how you can be a blessing to women who are just doing life. Right. So think about that. And then finally, I want you as a leader to think about how you can model those values that the church espouses. How can you personally make sure you model integrity, if that's a value, or honesty? I don't know, whatever it is, but I want you to think about that. Now, this is an activity, as I mentioned, that I would do if had a group that I was training a group of people, which I probably will soon in my area, or may do a Zoom training. I don't know. But this is something I definitely want you to think about. Okay. Now, here's another part as you're thinking about the church as an organization. This is really interesting. But I want you to know that you have church leaders, right? Who are leaders. That's the pastor, maybe the pastor over your ministry, who handles that. But then you have those informal leaders that every church and every organization has. Those are your two types of leadership structures: the formal people who are on the org charts, right? Who are on the black and white paper, and then you have the people who are behind the scenes that are kind of influential, that are kind of running things, even though their names aren't on anything. A lot of times that's a former pastor's wife, Yeah, but just know that they exist. Okay. So I want you to watch for these people, because really what they are stakeholders. They're people who have a stake in your ministry, and they probably have had their toe dipped into it for a long time. So I want you to kind of keep an eye out for who they are and be aware. It's not a bad thing necessarily, because if you are blessed, these people can be your biggest allies and your biggest supporters and even your biggest resources. So just know, very often, you might have people in the church office who are the informal leaders, especially the ones who handle the money. They have a stake in this, and it could be people who are just really super active church members who have a lot of influence with pastor and pastor's wife. It could be pastor's wife, as I mentioned. They could be the informal church leadership who could put the kibosh on things that you want to do, or could help you really make sure you succeed at it. Then you also have the past leaders of the ministry. So the women who led the ministry before you, if it existed before you, they could be your informal leaders in our leaderships. And then, of course, the pastor's family. I've said that like 3 times already, but it could be the pastor's daughter, his sister, somebody, connected with him. It could be anybody, but just want you to be aware that you have two leadership structures that you want to watch out for and be aware of, okay, and navigate well. Now, I have some tips for working with informal leaders. The first one is very clear. You got to leave your ego at the door. Okay. Very often through the years, the trouble that I have noticed and observed between informal leaders and formal leaders, or people who've been over things, it's ego. You got two egos clashing. You got the informal person who maybe led the ministry before you and they're threatened by you. And then you got the person who's new to the ministry who might be equally threatened by the other person, right? Or by their legacy. But either way, remember, it's about the Lord and what God wants to do with this ministry. So you're going to keep the ego at the door. Okay. And I said it because, you know what? We're Christians, but you know what? Yeah, people have egos. And I feel like so much of the church problems we have are all rooted in just that: pride and ego. So check it out. Okay. Check it, not check it out, but check it at the door. All right. Then I want you to just pray about meeting with the informal leader. Okay. And maybe it's more than one. Pray about meeting with them, telling them your heart and sharing with them and getting to know them, right? And letting them know you're not a enemy, but an ally. And you can even ask them, what kind of things would you like for us to work on or that you would like to see happen in the ministry? You can ask that. You might get some good ideas, good feedback, and definitely some good historical information that could help you moving forward. So see them as an ally, not an enemy. Okay. But I mentioned before, the biggest thing is you got to be humble. Okay. Don't go to them with arrogance or, insecurity, but humility and seeing them as a blessing and not a curse. Okay. And I have to say it, I want to keep it real. Now, I also think that it's important that when you're handling and interacting, I should say, with an informal leader, that you definitely keep your heart right for them. And I want you to see how you can serve what God has put on their heart for the ministry. And this is hard because when we take over a ministry, it's all about us, right? But again, I'm sitting on this humility part for a minute because you can create such a good source of help and encouragement if you handle this the way God would have you to handle it. All right. All right, enough of that. Let's get technical. Let's talk about your team. You're going to need a ministry team. And I want to encourage you to recruit the right people for the job. Don't put somebody who's unorganized over your administrative stuff. Okay? That'll bite you in the rear end. It will. I mean, don't do it just because it's your sister in law or your cousin or because you like them. You want to recruit the right people for the roles. Okay. I also don't want you to put somebody who doesn't know anything about computers over technology because it's political or because they're an informal leader. And if that's the case, I'm sorry. I do really want you to respect them. But if that's the case, and they insist on doing it, you got to pair somebody with them that knows what they're doing. But the point is you got to have the right people in the right spot. Now, there are so many ministry roles, but I'm going to cover just a few to give you some ideas. I have a sample ministry leader job description on womensministryresources.com. Okay, so you can go check that out. And I'm going to add more as I go along. I also have a blog post totally covering ministry roles and some sample responsibilities that you can use. But you definitely want to have a something written down so that people know what they can expect from you. There's a reason that jobs do this. There's a reason nonprofits do this with volunteers. It's so people can know what to expect and what needs to happen as a result of that person being on the team. Another person I encourage you to have, especially if you're going to be an events focused ministry, is a logistics person. OMG, logistics people are so helpful. So you want to make sure you have a person who is a logistics person. You need a food person. Somebody to handle all things food when you have events or even when you have your meetings. Have somebody that's over the cupcakes. Okay, I mean, it seems like a little thing, but when you have to do it for a lot of people, it gets to be a big thing. Then, as I mentioned before, you got to have a technology person. Okay, somebody who's going to help you with the technology and be able to handle it. All right, don't get somebody in there that doesn't know what they're doing. Then you have the marketing. This is one of your most important roles on your ministry team. And this is the person who you want somebody who's good at graphics. Don't just get somebody who's good at spreading the word. I have had this role divided out before where I had a social media person and I had a marketing person, or I had a graphic designer and a marketing person. I think you should fuse them all into one role, but have multiple volunteers. So, in other words, you'd have a marketing person, but maybe that person would want to recruit themselves, have them do it, recruit a, person that's good at social media, or recruit somebody who's good at creating graphics, and then they have their own little marketing department, and then you only interact with the marketing person, but their department reports out to you. That's one great way to handle this because all of these roles don't have to be one person doing all the work. It shouldn't be. Okay. Except for this one here. This one, I don't like a lot of people's hands in the money. So if you're not going to handle the money yourself as a ministry leader, have a treasurer and have them act pretty much alone. Okay, because not too many people need to have a say so in that. Now, I want you to think about all the things that need to happen in your ministry. What, based on that vision that God gave you, based on some goals that you might have, think about what needs to be done. And then you create positions to handle those roles. So this requires you to think a little bit. Think about it. Think about it. Now, managing your team. This is important because have you heard the saying that people do not leave, what do they say? People do not leave jobs, they leave managers. Oh my gosh, that's so true, isn't it? Sometimes they leave the work too, but a lot of times it's the manager. So you want to have some good skill and acumen in managing your team. You want to have clear goals and expectations for them. Right? You want to be able to communicate the goals and expectations that you have to them now. So you set the goals first, then you communicate them. I wanted that to fit in the little blue arrow, but I couldn't, so I just threw it to the side. Again, that's why it's free. So I'm like, but I want you to communicate the goals that you have for them. So I think very often people join a volunteer effort, but they have absolutely no clue at all what's expected of them. So do that early in the process. And then I want you to keep an eye out for how they're performing throughout the year. Just keep an eye out, and when you need to, provide feedback. But I recommend doing this like a business does it. At 6 months or at the end of the year, have a check-in with each person, and then you can provide feedback. So this means you kind of have to observe and keep some notes, right? And do kind of like a review. And then if people have areas that they want to work on, work with them to get better. Because one thing I'll tell you about volunteering is that it's a great opportunity to build some marketable skills. So some job related skills. So help people to be great. Help them to be awesome. You've heard the term, you won't let me be great. I want you to let people be great and help them to be great. All right, let's keep moving. I want you to definitely create job descriptions for your people. And again, make sure they all know what they're supposed to do and that they're very clear on it. And I want you to share every job description with everyone on the team so that they know what they can expect from their colleagues on the women's ministry team. Okay, somebody won't be handling marketing because they know who handles marketing, and they won't be having all of these vague ideas of what marketing it is because guess what? It's written out. And again, you can go to womensministryresources.com and see some samples. Okay. Now, volunteer management. There is a term that we just don't hear a lot in church, but we are all about the volunteers. Very few churches have staff that can do absolutely everything. And did you know there is an actual science to this? There are research papers about how to manage volunteers effectively. That's why you have so many volunteers with Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts. I don't know, I could go on, the American Heart Association, because people know how to manage their volunteers. They know how to support them, motivate them, and keep them engaged. The first tip I want to give you for managing your volunteers is make sure everybody knows how important women's ministry is to the kingdom. And I tell you, we are, as women, so significant to community and to society because we raise children. We are the ones who often volunteer when nobody else does at church. Let's be real. And women are just talented. Not that men aren't and men don't get things done, but I mean, you get it. Women, we're bad mamma jammas. And so the work we're doing to equip women to be strong Christian women is so important. I really believe that effective women's ministries can have an impact on teen pregnancy rates, on single parenthood, because it can teach women how to be strong wives and help women, and even on poverty levels. So, yeah, the work is important and reaffirm it often to your team. Okay, especially as a new leader, it's important. And then that ministry vision, I want you to communicate it often. Tell people often. You may be a volunteer, but your work is just important as a paid person with making the vision a reality. And your currency, I always call it the currency of the heart, is with volunteers get paid for. You're feeding their heart by helping them be a blessing to the community, to the world, and of course to the kingdom of God. So you're going to have a perspective of coaching them toward being excellent. Okay. Sometimes when people work with volunteers, they just think, oh, it's just a volunteer. So they don't try to help volunteers do better. Coach them, take time. And I'm going to give you some good leadership tips in a little bit so that you will know how to do that and you'll be able to do it well. But don't let them quit and easily. If people say they're going to quit, there's a reason they're quitting. A lot of times they'll give you an excuse, but you need to meet with your volunteer and see why they're leaving and make sure you let them know you want them to stay. Okay. Unless it's a volunteer that God is helping you out. All right. That's different. And then I want you to jump in and paraclete with them. And you know what a paraclete? That's what the Holy Spirit is. He does life with us. He goes alongside us. So I want you to jump in and do the work too with your volunteers. You know, if they're carrying in stuff from Costco and if you're able to do it, go do it. If they're cleaning tables or picking up paper off the floor, do it. But I want you to do work with them. Volunteers are valuable resources, okay? And you be a servant leader in that regard. Now, some volunteers are not going to perform optimally at the onset because a lot of times you get volunteers who have the desire, which we'll talk about, but they may not have the skills to match it. So look for your diamonds in the rough. But just know you're going to have to be a part of shining that diamond. You're going to have to coach. You're going to have to give advice. You're going to have to guide. You may have to babysit. Okay. But hold on to your volunteers and realize your volunteers are gold for your women's ministry. Now, there's a couple of ways I like to look at volunteers when I kind of self assess them. And often it takes you a minute to know what people are good at. But what I like to do is based on what they said they were going to do for the ministry, I will, at the beginning of their volunteer experience, I will rate them on how well I think they will do on it and how competent they are. And then I will look at it a little bit later down the road and see how they actually performed in that area. So the first one is competence. How competent are they? How skilled are they at it? And then, of course, you got commitment. Now, I'm going to tell you, commitment is nothing to sneeze at. Okay. Because if you have a committed volunteer, honey, you can teach them anything if they want to be taught. You can teach them. But that commitment, you can't buy that. You can't beat it with a stick. I mean, it's very important. It's more important, I think, than competency, in my opinion, because you can have a competent person with a bad attitude and it may be even a little bit of arrogance. All right. So, but that committed person, oh boy, that's something you can work with. Now, I'm not going to go into a deep dive into situational leadership, but I think it has some applications, or not applications. Well, yeah, implications, but it does have some applications here. There are four ways of leading your team, and there's four stages that you're going to lead them. There's directing, that's going to be part of your leadership style. There's coaching, that's going to be part of how you lead. There's going to be times you're going to be more supporting. And there's going to be times where you are at the optimal level, which is just delegating. Now, here's the mistake a lot of new ministry leaders make. When they come in, they start here. They start at the delegating. You can't start there all the time. Sometimes you can, but you can't all the time. So you have to look at leadership as make yourself kind of a leadership chameleon. You'll have different ways that you will lead. All right. So let's talk about each one. All right, let's get started and talk about directing first. Now, directing is when you actually have a brand new leader and you got to tell them what to do all the time. This is just a reality of leadership. You know, sometimes you're going to get people who I say aren't baked. Not that they're half baked, but they're not baked. They're not ready. And so, what I'll do is I will understand that at that our first interactions are going to be me kind of hovering and hand holding and supporting them. Okay, because it's important not to throw a newbie out there into the wolf of women's ministry without being ready. Right. So just know that there are those seasons where you'll have the basic level of leadership, which is, you know, pretty much more hands on than you would be if you were doing leadership with someone more skilled. Okay, so think of this as your brand new green volunteers. You're going to have to be more in a directing stage of leadership. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that at the directing level, people aren't terribly committed yet. Okay, not often. Sometimes they might be, but often they're not committed yet. So they have low skill, low will. Okay, WILL. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're just learning. Okay. Then you have the coaching. The coaching, or some people in situational leadership circles call this the selling. And this is perfect for the team members who have some competency. They're pretty good. They're not terrible at it, but they just got some areas they still need to work on. Maybe they don't have their mojo in place yet, but they're getting there, right? So you just have to coach them, guide them, you know? You don't have to necessarily direct them and tell them what to do because they've built some competency. They just need a little bit of help from you. Alrighty. Then you have your next level, which is supporting. Supporting. And when you're supporting, you have a member that is competent. They might be a little bit inconsistent, maybe don't come to meetings like they should. Um, Maybe a little bit of a challenge sometimes, but basically they know what they're doing and their heart is in it, but they just may have some hiccups to work on, right? So I've heard this mentioned as high skill, low will. So they know what they're doing, but you just got to get them there. Got a ways to go with them. Then you got delegating. This is where you can delegate. You know that this girl is got it. She's fully empowered. She's competent. She doesn't need a lot of direction, right? If any. And this is your sweet spot, right? This is your high skill, high will, right? So this is who you have when you know that, hey, I could be sick today and she's going to cover it. She's going to run the meeting. She's going to make it work and everything's going to be just fine because she's there. So that is where you really want to get everybody. Right. You really want to get everybody to a point of the delegating and yeah, that's the S4 is what is called in the situational leadership. And let me give you some other terms and kind of a spin on it. Directing can also be called telling. So it's telling, selling, participating, and delegating. So that's another way of looking at it, but I like these old-fashioned terms. So that's one way that you have to know that your leadership is going to look different ways to different people and in different seasons. All right. Another thing to remember is if your team changes suddenly and you get a lot of new people or you revamp or whatever, you're going to have to probably be at that directing stage when you were at the delegating stage before. So it really just depends, but new leaders need to know that there's different approaches and you're going to want to take those different approaches. But the main thing I want you to remember is you're going to coach toward the delegating and you're going to be patient with your people and know that you can get them there. That means you're not going to lower your standards because they're quote unquote just volunteers, right? You're not going to accept just any kind of behavior or any kind of service either, but you're going to work with people and be patient with people, okay, to get them to where they need to be. Now, we're going to talk about you being a good communicator too. That's going to be important on whatever level of skill that you're working on. We're going to talk about communication. Um, so yeah, let me just jump into it because I was going to go on another rabbit hole, but that's for another time, another training. Hey, I'm going to make sure you can get this infographic. It will be available in the resources, but I want to give you some tips on listening because one thing I've learned through the years is ministry leaders don't have a problem with talking and communicating sometimes in a way of just getting things out, but they do have a challenge sometimes with listening. So let's talk about that. There are often communication barriers that you're going to want to be familiar with and aware of when you're listening and working with your staff. And by staff, I do mean your volunteer staff. You want to be aware of everything from, I want you to take a moment to just look at what's on the screen. You don't need me to read to you, but I want you to be aware of everything here. And actually, I will because I may have people of different abilities and varied abilities. So I'm going to read it to you. You may have people with different personalities. right? That can be a communication barrier. Another communication barrier is people who are defensive, and you could be one of them, or people who don't want to listen, just, want to talk. You can have trust issues that create communication barriers. And you can have people who are just mad and they're giving the cold shoulder and bearing grudges, big communication barrier. You also have different expectations. That's why it's so important to make sure people know what you expect of them. And then of course there are assumptions. You people have a barrier because they have assumptions about someone else. Then there of course the fatigue. People are just tired. That's a big communication barrier, in which case you just need to talk another time. I'm so good with my husband in saying that. Sometimes I'm just burned out and I'm like, can we talk about this tomorrow? I just can't even hear it right now. So yeah, and then of course you got the burnout where ministry has just been so taxing. They're tired, they're overwhelmed. You're tired, you're overwhelmed, and then of course the negativity is a big communication barrier. When people are negative. So those things I want you to think about as you're working with your team. Now let's move in to ministry goals. Okay, ministry goals, because you got to want to know what you're going to do with your ministry. And there's a reason I put this last, because some of the other preliminary areas that we often just skip over and miss, they're important because you need your team to help you with your ministry goals. But if you have issues with where you guys are brand new with each other, you're not used to working together, you have a lot of people that you really need to work with and support and direct, it's hard to have ministry goals. So I actually recommend you do a few meetings, get to know your people before you even start working on your ministry goals with the team. Now, that doesn't mean you don't work on them by yourself, because you got to have a vision and maybe some rough drafts. But I'd want you to definitely take some time, before doing this. This is important. Now, I want you to have another shameless plug. Go to Women's Ministry Resources. You're going to find lots of resources on goals. I have a great article, and you'll notice that my articles aren't often short and pithy because they're meant to inform and educate. So put a bookmark in, read a little, come back and visit it. Do the activities, come back and revisit it. But just know that's a great resource for you, and that's why it is there. Now, okay, I got some hokey things with my bullets, but I want you to know that the goal is your future and condition, or your end point that you want the ministry to have. And you'll see the bullseye. Do you know, when I designed this, and I did not realize that the store Target has that logo because it's a target. Duh. I'm sorry. I'm an educated woman with advanced degrees, but I did not know that. Anyway, so yeah, your goal is your target, and your objective is what you want to do or have to do to get to that target. So look at the image. You have a target that looks like the store Target icon, but then you have the steps. Each step is labeled objective because that is, in my opinion, a perfect depiction of what an objective is. It's the steps you make or take to get to your target. Now, I want you to read that article that I mentioned on women's ministry goals. Um, and I want you to look at that. And then I want you to come back to this after you get a chance to look at it. And then I want you to write three ministry goals that and corresponding objectives. So after reading that, I want you to write three goals for your women's ministry. And then I want you to have as many objectives as you need to write out to reach that goal. Okay. And then I want you to find a ministry leader or someone who's really good at setting goals. Could be a VP at a bank, that's a church member or a friend or a pastor, anybody. And I want you to get feedback on your goals. Okay. And then that's before you even take them to your people. Now, I want you to be proud of yourself because you're a long way into this training, and I hope you're learning a lot, but you're doing great. I want to just tell you, you're taking in a lot of information, but you're doing a great job, okay? So hang in there. We're going to keep moving. Alrighty. Now, I'm going to make available to you a women's ministry planning sheet that will help you tie all of this up into a neat little bow. Okay, so you can record all of this. And I didn't want to give it to you as a handout, but I want it to be something that you can take away because I want you to ruminate. And you got some homework. You're going to go to the blog and you're going to read some things, and you got some things you're going to be doing. So I want you to think about filling this out after you were able to do some of the other things and contemplate for a little while. Now, what we've covered in this training for new ministry leaders is your confidence level. You're going to know that, hey, you're going to be confident in doing this because why? God will equip you to do everything He's called you to do. So don't worry about it. We've talked about church leadership. There's informal leadership and what? Formal leadership. And I want you to reach out and talk about and learn about your mission, your vision, and goals of the church so you can align with those, or at least make sure you're not going against those, if nothing else. I also talked about ministry planning, how you can plan to build an infrastructure for your ministry, and then I gave you some great tips on how you'll lead your team and how you'll manage your team, right? And my favorite part, ministry planning goals is what we rounded it out with. We finished with ministry planning goals. So I want you to definitely lead your team. Know that you are in charge of this team, but you're also a servant leader. You're cohorts with this team. Okay. You're friends with this team. And then I want you to go about managing your team with the heart Jesus had with his, right? He was firm, but he was also right in the trenches, right there with them. Now, I want you to provide feedback on this because I do have some other areas I want to explore. But before I write all of that content and create it, I want to know how this worked for you. So I want you to let me know and give me some feedback on how this worked for you. I also want you to know there are future areas that we will address in future trainings. I will create a module on planning an action plan for you. I'm going to create a module on how to assess the effectiveness of your women's ministry at the end of the year, and even some formative assessments that you can do throughout the year. And then I'm going to give you some good planning tips. I'm gonna create some good workshop material on that as well. And finally, I want you to visit and subscribe to womensministryresources.com and get some great information that'll support you and keep you ready for the task at hand. I want to thank you so much for being part of this training experience, and I pray that it was a blessing for you. And I pray that everyone within the sound of my voice is anointed by the Holy Spirit to do this work and to do it confidently and to know that God is with them. And that he's never going to leave, he's never going to forsake, and he's definitely not going to leave you hang out to dry. Thank you so much for participating in this, and God bless you in everything that you endeavor in women's ministry.